Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 79 of Welcome to Geektown. This is an extra long episode, so I'm going to skip my usual introduction. This is episode 5 of my deep dive into WandaVision with friend and listener Joel L., so this is unlikely to be the first episode you try. After our usual praise of the episode in general, Joel and I get right into it, starting at the very beginning with the Previously On segment, in which I noticed something unusual. Let's go ahead and start the conversation right there. So, in the Previously On, they did something that television shows will do occasionally, and normally it bothers me, but in this case I have to wonder if it was done purposefully.
With editing things a little bit?
Not just editing things a little bit, but using a completely different take with completely different lines. When Vision comes in and says, "Where's Geraldine?" in the original episode, Wanda said, "She left, honey. She had to go home." In this Previously On, Wanda says, "She's gone. She didn't belong here."
Wow, I totally missed that.
And like I said, I have to wonder if that's done purposefully in showing how fluid this reality is.
Right.
Or if it was done the same way that other shows do, that just using a different take for some reason, or using an alternate line reading, or whatever the choice was. But it is a very different message.
It is, but it summarizes things in a different way that I think would be more effective to catch you up, as if you needed catching up, on what's happening here.
You don't really need a Previously On.
No, but in the 80s, that's what happened.
Right, yeah. Back when they had two-parter episodes and things like that, they would do those Previously Ons, and they still do them on other streaming shows today, like Star Trek Discovery and shows like that. But this show is getting so much discussion in between episodes,
right.
Not just from us, obviously, but it just seems like people in general, if you're watching the show, you're discussing it. And so I don't know how much reminder you need of what happened before, necessarily.
True, but again, it's the style of the show that Wanda wants shown in that CBRM or whatever the radiation is.
CBMR.
I was
Cosmic.
so close.
Yeah, you were. Cosmic Background Microwave Radiation.
That. She is broadcasting this, and this is an 80s show, and there was previous episodes had important information for this episode, so of course it's going to have a Previously On.
Yeah. Speaking of it being an 80s show, something I noticed, though, is that it's in widescreen now.
I was actually noticing they've been playing a lot with the aspect ratios, not just this episode, but previous episodes as well, really, really effectively, and I think that the last time I saw anything use aspect ratios as a tool as well as this was Galaxy Quest. In Galaxy Quest, what they did was the first third of it, before Tim Allen realizes what's happening and that it's actually real, it's a certain dimension. And then when he is put into that pod where they open up the doors and it's just the space starscape, when they opened the doors, they also opened up the aspect ratio another 5-10%, so that everyone had that reaction of, whoa! no! And it just, in the theaters, it worked so beautifully.
That's really well done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it makes sense, though, that because we're going to be switching back and forth now between the TV and the real world so much, to not necessarily make those aspect ratio transitions. When it happened just once at the end of the episode, that was a good kind of visual reference, but now making multiple transitions over the entire episode, I think it's fine to just keep it all widescreen. That's what we're used to looking at, and we all know what's real and what's not.
You're not wrong, but they're still doing it. I don't know if you saw that. When they are in the real world, it is wider widescreen. There are black bars on the top and bottom of the screen.
Okay.
And when they're in the television show, it is filling up the entire screen. So it's still widescreen. It's just a different aspect ratio.
It's no longer the 4:3, though, which, if
Right.
you were showing a real show in the 80s, was still the aspect ratio of that time.
That's true.
So the show opens with the babies crying. Now, do you know your Britishisms? Did you hear what Vision said when they were dancing together?
I'm not sure what you're referring to at this point.
Okay, so they're rocking the babies and they're doing the little dance, and he says,
Oh, I was about to throw my leg over.
I was about to get my leg over, yes. That is British for sex.
Well, I assumed.
I assumed too, but I had to look it up because it was not a phrase I was familiar with.
All right.
I thought that was a little risque for the 80s.
Yes and no. Filmmakers and television makers have always done everything they could to push the boundaries.
Fair enough.
One of those things that they've done is use euphemisms from other countries that our censors may not know.
Yeah.
That the MPAA might not be conscious of.
Yeah, that goes all the way back to the earliest example I'm aware of is I Love Lucy, where she couldn't say that she was pregnant, so she said she was pregnant in Spanish. I don't remember what the word is.
Huh.
But they couldn't use the word pregnant on the air, so she tells Ricky that she's pregnant in Spanish.
Wow. Good for them. That's clever. Because that's totally in character for the two of them.
Exactly. So then Wanda tries to put the babies to sleep magically.
Yeah, that was kind of neat.
But it doesn't work.
That's what was neat about it.
So I think because the babies aren't people that she's controlling,
Mm-hmm.
possibly because of their origins, again, pointing to my theory that this is all going to relate to Mephisto and his efforts to get into this world.
Right.
So she can't control them.
I mean, one of the things that comes up in this episode is what about things that don't require any transition when they cross the border? These kids never crossed the border. They started off here.
True. But then, well, we'll get to it, but they have their own powers.
Yes, they do.
But before we get to that, Agnes shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that breaking the wall moment.
Yeah. There were several of them this episode, and I think it's an indicator that she is not in as much control as she was, or she's losing control the more she needs to focus on. As we mentioned last time, that she wasn't focusing on Vision, so Vision lost his glamour. Or it could just be that as she is becoming more aware of what's happening, which we will talk about later, I'm sure,
Yeah.
that her conscience is starting to kick in, or she's not maintaining as effectively.
Mm-hmm. I think that basically it's kind of a cascading effect where the more reality breaks, the harder it is to keep it going and keep that illusion up.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, the original break stems from Vision not going along with the script, so to speak. He says, you know what? I don't want you holding the babies. And she's like, no, yes you do. Or Wanda does. Wanda wants me to hold the babies, and that's the script we're following, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
So we get more of Vision having his own agency and that causing problems in this world.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed specifically when the break happens is not only do we get no audience noise, but
the babies are silent.
The babies stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
And it just completely breaks the world so much that everything goes silent except for this conversation.
Yeah. Which is jarring for a number of reasons, including we have established a few times that she does not have control over the babies.
Right. But the babies crying in a sitcom, that would be done with Foley.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense that, when it breaks and Agnes kind of acts like an actress saying, do you want to take that over? Should we start from the top?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was interesting that they use that kind of actor's terminology for all of it. That it felt like a blooper from one of those bloopers shows that we saw so much in the 80s.
Right.
And so in that kind of world, if reality breaks, or if people break character, then the Foley artist would say, oh, I need to stop this tape and rewind. And so the babies would stop crying in that case. Now, very soon thereafter, then we get to the kids aging. And Agnes does not react to that at all.
No, it's just another one of those things.
Yeah, so when you combine all those things, it feels so much like Agnes is playing along and is in on it. She knows more than the average resident.
At the very least, she knows more than the audience watching the Disney Plus show was led to believe that she knew up to this point.
Right. So we continue to point towards her being Agatha Harkness and having more information and being more involved than most residents.
Later, there are indicators that counter that. We'll talk about them when we get to them.
Makes sense. Now, when the twins do age, I liked how they differentiated the twins.
With the outfits?
Yes. Billy is always wearing red, whereas Tommy is in blues, greens, and grays, which matches the characters' superhero outfits when they become teenagers in the Marvel Comics. Billy is Wiccan, and so he's kind of a Scarlet Witch type character and wears a lot of reds in his costume. And Tommy has an outfit very similar to Quicksilver's because he has the same powers, and it's all in greens and grays. And so you can already see them moving towards those characters.
Right.
And now finally we get to the opening theme song.
Oh my god. Now the opening theme song felt initially very Family Ties. And we talked, this opening sequence felt very Family Ties.
Right. And the set decoration is just straight out of Family Ties. The stained glass window on the landing, the placement of the stairs and the couch and the windows and everything looked just straight out of that Family Ties living room.
Mm-hmm. But as that opening credits sequence continued, it transitioned very quickly into Growing Pains.
Yes. Well, there are 3 shows that they are doing homages to all at the same time with different aspects of it. The painting is Family Ties, straight out.
Yes.
Taking the line painting and basically doing a color by numbers and turning it into a color painting. Mm-hmm. Then Growing Pains, they use the pictures of the cast at different ages, showing them growing
Vision.
up. Yes,
Oh,
Young
God.
Vision. Now, I really hope that they found pictures of Paul Bettany at different ages and put that Vision makeup on digitally.
I do too. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, obviously, that's not how Vision grew up.
Vision didn't grow up.
Right. So it just added an extra layer of humor to it.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing that little baby Vision and teenage Vision at the chalkboard. And yeah, no, that was perfect. And then the third show is Full House.
Okay.
All of the outdoor scenes of them like running towards the camera in the park and sitting down for a picnic. All of that is straight out of the Full House opening credits.
Okay.
And so they kind of merge all those shows together. And once again, the theme song was so well done.
It really was.
That ballad duet all about family and love was just Family Ties, Growing Pains, all those shows had that same sort of theme song to them. And the composers are just doing a great job continually of moving forward and doing these perfect homages to the shows of the era they're in.
Absolutely. And I thought it was nice that the two of them, Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez, were the ones singing during that opening theme, which obviously in the 80s they had the same 3 or 4 people doing all of the theme songs. But it was nice that they got their voices in there.
Right. Yeah. And now immediately after the opening theme, we then switch back to the real world.
Yes, and something's up with Monica. Yeah, you were right on about this being an origin story for her.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense that an X-ray would show up as blank if someone is made entirely out of photons.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way X-rays work is the thing has to be dense enough for the X-rays not to go through it. And that's what shows up as the whiter.
Right, it's an interesting thing. Being a former medical professional, I do have some experience with the X-rays, and basically the X-rays going through makes the film darker. So it should have been a black image if it was a traditional X-ray machine. But I could be wrong on this. I'm pretty sure, however, that the digital X-ray machines go in reverse. It's still picking up the images that go through, or the photons that go through, but I believe that those show up as light instead of dark, and then to get the traditional X-ray image, you have to inverse the color to get it, so they just hadn't done that part, and it just showed up as a bright white screen.
Yeah, so it probably was a digital one,
Mm-hmm.
Which
it would have been.
Yeah, we saw her holding a computer screen.
Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't have taken that short if it wasn't digital.
Right.
For it to be processed as a 15-20 minute thing.
Well, then that makes sense, the way it was portrayed.
Yeah. And as you say, if she's something that is not quite human anymore, and, they mentioned that the lab work needs to be redone because whatever is in her blood isn't quite what they expected, that's also indicating that something's wonky.
But not so wonky that they're stopping her from attending briefings or leaving the med lab or anything like that.
Well, things move fast in the suburbs.
Yeah, we'll see how her powers develop as the show continues.
Assuming we see it in this show, it could be the long game here.
It could be. It could be that we don't see it until Captain Marvel 2. There's another thing that will come up later that I think was building foundations for stories in Captain Marvel 2 rather than something that will necessarily be a part of this show.
Right.
And so let's move on to the briefing. Since Jimmy is here, this is a good time to bring up that there's something I missed when we were doing last episode and talking about Jimmy Woo.
Okay.
There's a little bit of his history in the comics that I failed to mention that is probably of interest and curiosity to people like yourself who don't know the comics at all. But you know pop culture, so between his Yellow Claw appearances in the 50s and his Agents of Atlas team in the 2000s, he did reappear in a Marvel book.
Okay.
That Marvel book was called Godzilla.
What? Oh my god. What?
So for a while, Marvel had the publishing rights, had the comic book rights to the Godzilla comic, and they put Godzilla just straight into the Marvel universe.
Wow.
And Dum Dum Dugan, who we see in Captain America, the first Avenger, as a running character, and he shows up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in some flashbacks.
I think he even showed up in Agent Carter once or twice.
Yeah, I believe so. So he ran the Godzilla squad, and Jimmy Woo was on that squad and helped build Mechagodzilla to fight against Godzilla. And yeah, Godzilla gets shrunk down with Pym particles for a while. And
Godzilla with the proportional strength at that would not be a fun bad guy.
No, he was like human-sized. And the series ends with Godzilla fighting the Fantastic Four and the Avengers and heading back into the Atlantic to retreat. And Godzilla is never seen again in Marvel Comics.
Huh. Or at least not yet.
Well, yeah, that's true. But currently Godzilla is, I believe, in Universal's stable of characters.
Right.
So Disney does not have that one at the moment.
Not yet. They're buying everything else. Why not?
Exactly. Eventually it will all be Disney, just like all restaurants will be Taco Bell.
Right. Demolition and reference. Getting back to Jimmy, we still don't yet know who Jimmy's CI is.
True.
And from what we have seen on screen, he hasn't seen them in Westview yet.
True, he has not reacted saying, "There's the guy I was looking for."
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that after he talks to Monica, we only really get one. In the episode 4 briefing,
right.
He says, this started as a missing persons case, so we're going to work it from that angle. So we get a couple of mentions of it, but it never seems to be Jimmy's primary focus. So it may be one of those things that's just how they brought Jimmy to this town, and it's a random person. It's Dennis the mailman, and he just hasn't mentioned it on screen yet.
Right.
But as you've said, this is the kind of show where those kind of details can get brought back up later and can be very important to the show.
Right. Or at the very least, my expectation is if the CI never materializes as a character in the Wanda version of Westview, then once everything is resolved and they're able to enter the town, there will be a scene or at least a moment of Jimmy shaking hands with someone and saying, "I'm glad you're okay."
Alternatively,
Uh-oh.
Randall Park has said he's completely open to becoming a larger part of the MCU and being in future shows and such. And so possibly we could have a scene where he says, "Where'd my CI go? He was here." And that could lead into an Agents of Atlas type show where
they start off by searching for this guy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they picked up Agent Coulson and ran with him, so they could easily have said, "This is our next Agent Coulson," and start planning
appearances.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
Let's finally get to the actual briefing. They did another one of those things where I think they said more in how things were cut together than it just being an accident. I remember how in the last episode I talked about how
Cutting to the babies.
Yeah. Monica says it's all Wanda, and then they cut to the babies instead.
Right.
In here, Hayward's terrorists.
Right. That could have just been for comedic value.
It could have been just for comedic value, but boy, Hayward is acting a lot more villainous in this episode than we've seen him before. I have to wonder if he is part of some sort of Hydra AIM.
It's hard to say. He's acting consistent with the governmental organizations that are not a part of our heroes' teams throughout the MCU. When the Sokovia Accords were presented to the Avengers, the governmental representative was kind of being a dick about it, in similar ways to how the acting director here is.
That's true. That was Thunderbolt Ross from The Incredible Hulk.
Yes.
Who was now Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, he's been consistently a dick in many ways throughout.
Right. We'll get to it in a little bit, but I think he crosses lines that makes him even more villainous than your average government agent in the MCU.
Yes, and. We'll get there.
Really quick, you mentioned the Sokovia Accords. We learn one of the specific paragraphs of the Sokovian Accords. Section 36B. Does it say no resurrections there?
It must have something to do with that, because that's... And why would they specify that?
It's a very weird way that gets brought up of... we learn where Vision's body was. They were studying it at Sword.
Mm-hmm.
Which they say very shortly thereafter that's against the Sokovia Accords and against his living will of her taking him and resurrecting him. Wouldn't Sword studying him also be against that living will?
That was exactly what I was going to say. They are being awfully judgy for a group that tore him limb from limb and had him connected to all kinds of wires and machines.
Yeah. It looks like they're basically trying to recreate the Vision. And I understand the
desire.
The desire, the motivation to do so. But at the same time, if that was against his living will, if that was against his wishes, they should not be doing that.
No, they really shouldn't.
Also during this briefing, we finally learned the timeline.
Right, this was 9 days ago.
Yes. 9 days ago was when she took Vision's body. What's odd to me is that they didn't keep track of her after that.
Yeah, that seems like kind of an important thing.
When Hayward sends Monica to Westview, he's like, missing persons case, it's no big deal. It seems like he would have known at that point. He should have known at that point where Wanda went, and...
Well, that depends on how she traveled and all of that stuff. But let's take it a step back. We just talked about how Hayward is acting very villainous. Maybe he did.
Possible. But at the same time, he seemed very surprised when he saw the broadcast of the television show.
Right.
So, I don't know. How much he knew and when he knew it is a weird question that I have, and will hopefully... That's the kind of thing I do want answered by the end.
And I found an interesting little tidbit. Acting director of Sword, Hayward, received authorization to share video from his own headquarters with his own team. Who did he need authorization from?
Well, if it is top secret, if it is classified information, he needs someone to declassify it enough to share with a team that is not necessarily have classified level clearance. That would be something that someone above him even would need to do, possibly.
I guess. Just felt a little odd. A little awkward.
I can see that, but at the same time...
Feasible.
Yeah. Knowing the bit I do know about how classified level information works, I know that it takes very high level to be able to say, yes, go ahead and show this to everyone. I don't care what classification level they have.
Yeah, okay. 2 more quick things while we're in the briefing. First, I like that Hayward was scripted too, but he was playing with the "so she doesn't have a funny nickname?" It's just Wanda? Really?
Yeah, and it's true. As Jimmy points out, she has never been called the Scarlet Witch in the show, or in the movies.
Right.
And she's basically the only one who doesn't have a superhero name yet.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with someone else, and I mean, Pietro never got one, but he was never a superhero. I mean,
well,
he was only known publicly as a villain.
Right. He never becomes an official Avenger.
Right.
He helps them, but he's not part of the team as is publicly shown.
Yeah. So it's basically just the 2 of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to point out was that they're still playing with color, especially with Wanda. They're watching this footage that is clearly... It is security camera footage. It is monochrome. It is black and blue. Except for her powers. She is still affecting the world in reds. Even in that recording of the security footage.
Yeah. Her powers are, in the comics at least, her powers are magical in nature. And so the fact that she can make black and white footage red is a power beyond even physics. She can change reality.
Which we are seeing a lot of this episode.
Yes. But before we get back into that, before we see the full nature of her reality shaping powers, we go back to the show.
Yes.
And we get our first introduction to Sparky.
You say that in a way that makes me think that Sparky exists in the comics.
He does.
Okay.
Tom King wrote a miniseries called Vision. And in that book, Vision created his own family that was entirely made of other synthezoids. He created a wife, a son, a daughter, and moved out to the suburbs and tried to live a normal life. They've said that that series is one of the sources of inspiration for this show. And Sparky was originally the neighbor's dog, but was accidentally killed.
Huh.
And then Vision makes a Vision dog using the neighbor's dog's memory engrams, the same way that Vision was created using Wonder Man's, and Ultron was created with Hank Pym's, Jocasta's with the Wasps, all of those other androids that we've talked about in previous episodes. So he creates a dog Vision, and the dog's name is Sparky.
Okay.
And so, yes, this is the MCU introduction to Sparky.
It may be the outroduction also. We don't know.
Well, yes, unfortunately, because that's a cute dog.
It was. That was a lot of the point.
Yeah. Cute dog, cute kids. They are definitely hitting those 80s vibes with those kids and the cuteness factor.
Mm-hmm.
And we get another appearance of Agnes here, showing up with a doghouse just as they are adopting a dog. She is continuing to do everything she can to facilitate this world and make it as easy as possible for things to go the way Wanda wants things to go.
Which is one of the things that Vision comments on at this point.
Exactly. And then Wanda uses her powers straight. I mean, Agnes is looking down, but she's in the same room, and Vision, understandably, freaks out about it. He's really disconcerted, and at this point, he's saying, "You're hiding something. You're not... What are you not telling me?" This is where the real crux of the show, of this episode, starts. We get a little bit of it in that earlier scene with Agnes showing up, but Vision is not happy. And I think that, especially moving forward, that's going to be one of the main conflicts, is whether or not Vision is okay with being in this reality.
Well, that was one of the questions that was brought up in the previous scene, right at the tail end of it, is she's got the world's only vibranium synthezoid playing Father Knows Best, and what's gonna happen when he finds out?
Yeah. The character interactions are so important to this show. This is so much more a character study than any MCU project we've gotten to this date. Even something like the original Iron Man, which was dealing a lot with Tony and his personal issues.
All three of the Iron Mans.
True. But there's so little action in this, and so much more character moments, so much more in-depth discussion of feelings, and I'm really happy with the way this show is going, and the fact that Marvel is willing to go in this direction. Because after Endgame, you can't go bigger.
Right. So if you can't go bigger, you have to go smaller.
Yeah, you go deeper.
And I think that it was brilliant of them not only to focus on Wanda, because Wanda is a fairly unexplored character up to this point, but also at this point in our history to focus on a female character is a very smart move on their part. We know from meta-knowledge that this is the kickoff of Phase 4. We know that WandaVision is an important piece of this puzzle, but this episode in many ways really demonstrates that.
Yes.
And this storyline, this 9-episode arc, is a huge kickoff to the next several movies and shows. And having all of that centered around a female character, which we have not seen in the last 10-11 years of the MCU as much. Even if you look at Captain Marvel, she's a huge character. She is a massive storyline that the movie, because it takes place in the past, all of the events are predetermined and they don't really impact our understanding of the universe. They don't propel the MCU forward.
I see what you're saying.
So she's a big character, but she's not an important character yet.
Got it.
Wanda's an important character.
Yes. And the fact that she's going to be in Doctor Strange 2 as an important character, she is definitely a big part of what's happening moving forward.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that more a little later.
Yeah.
But for now, let's go back to Sparky.
Okay.
And the kids. I love where Wanda's like, we don't think you're quite ready for a dog yet. Maybe when you're... looks back at Vision. 10. Yeah. She's
Felt
like,
very Ghostbusters-y to me on that one.
I was just reminded of basically every father or husband-wife conversation in front of
Sure.
kids where, okay, we need to be on the same page here.
Mm-hmm.
And so she says, when you're 10, then you'll be ready. And they look at each other and like, ready?
Nod.
All right, let's do it. And so, again, it's funny, we discussed earlier, I think it got cut out of the regular episode, but if you're a Patreon for just $1, you can hear us discuss earlier where we kind of theorized of how many episodes are we going to get at various ages.
Right.
And we were off because
Yes.
we thought we were going to get at least a full episode of
babies.
And or toddlers.
And they pulled right into the trope that you had mentioned of we're moving the ages fast.
Yep. So, yeah, we get all the way to age 10. And so, again, it makes me wonder if the kids are more in charge of this reality than Wanda is.
Possibly. At the same time, it's kind of like they age themselves at moments of heightened emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And when they have specific desire. And it's kind of implied that the two of them are doing this, but at the same time, being a brother myself, I know that sometimes when you look at each other the way that they look at each other, both times that we see them aging or almost aging on screen, sometimes it's let's do this, and sometimes it's I'm ready for you to do this.
Well, as I've pointed out, in the comics, it is Billy who has the magical powers.
Which is what I was getting to, yeah.
Yeah, so if one of them is doing it, it is Billy. Now, in the comics, at least, there is a verbal component to Billy's magic.
Okay.
When he does a spell, he basically says what he wants to happen over and over really fast. So if he wants to teleport the team to the blue area of the moon, he says, take us to the moon, take us to the moon, take us to the moon.
Okay.
And so there's nothing like that happening here, but that is something that would probably come off as a little silly.
It might.
And so they're doing it just silently instead. And so his powers act a little differently in the MCU versus the comics.
Which is totally understandable. It's also entirely possible that that construct is something that was developed to control the magical powers in a way that they aren't quite as random. We've seen in various magic-related universes. I'm a big fan of the Dresden Files, for example, and in that universe, the main character uses magic, and the construct in his brain is the important part, and he could release the energy silently, but that has many unexpected side effects, and he really uses the words to constrain and focus the magic. It could be something like that Billy discovers as time goes on.
Yeah, in the comics, we don't ever see Billy as a young child. We see them as babies in the Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries that we talked about way back when.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see them again in Young Avengers as teenagers. So I'm gonna love seeing Billy and Tommy get their powers. I hope it happens in this series.
I have strong suspicion, especially with what happens in that last minute of this episode. We'll see some things going on in the next few episodes.
Yeah. And we have another moment with Agnes just totally
Being cool
blowing
with
over.
Things going weird.
Yep. Kids just grow up fast. You can't control them. Again, the exact wording of kids, you can't control them,
Mm-hmm.
made me think, are the kids more in charge than what we know. Then we go back to the real world again, and I love that Darcy is the one that gives the hex its name. If you would all watch The Flash, she seems very much the Cisco of the group. And so she's the one that comes up with the hex. And something I noticed in the briefing is that the map shows the town and the border is hexagonal. The magical barrier is also in a hex shape. And so that's what Darcy is referring to when she says it's the hexagonal shape.
Right.
It's not just what we're seeing in the show.
Which we did not see this episode.
Well, that's true, but that's partially because the closing credits, as they were, happened weirdly, which we'll get to. But as I pointed out back in our first episode talking about the show, is Wanda's powers were originally called Hex Bolts. I love that they're doing these little things to kind of tie in the comics to the MCU, and it's something that someone like you who doesn't normally read the comics, it completely makes sense in the context of the show, but at the same time, for people like me who have read the comics, there's that extra layer of kind of Easter egg, reference that allows another level of appreciation.
Absolutely.
And so as they're talking about the hex and they're talking about Wanda and the level of her powers, they say, well, she could have taken out Thanos if he hadn't run a blitz. And then Jimmy says, well, I think Captain Marvel is also of that level. And Monica's reaction...
The look on her face.
Yeah. So Monica, as we've pointed out, was the little kid in the first Captain Marvel movie. She's Lieutenant Trouble. She loved Aunt Carol. So what happened? My feeling is probably this is... I mentioned it earlier that there was another moment that I thought was planting seeds for Captain Marvel 2 rather than being an important part of this show. I think this is that other moment.
I agree, and I think that my personal theory is that Carol in some way is directly responsible for her mother's cancer.
I can totally see that theory. That theory makes total sense. It's hard to see how exactly that would be true, considering the timeline of it. My feeling was more of that Carol wasn't there when Maria died, and she could have brought some sort of Kree device to heal her cancer, or just the fact that she wasn't there at all.
Right. Yeah, she clearly has mixed feelings, because in a previous episode, when Director Hayward said something about there being threats in the skies, or threats in... There's always been threats in space, she was the one who corrected him and said, and allies.
That's true. So she knows Captain Marvel is a good person, but at the same time, there's some resentment about something. And we'll have to wait and see to find out if that is something that gets resolved in this, or if it is working towards Captain Marvel 2.
I very strongly suspect the latter.
Me too. The other question I had was, with this whole discussion, was the entire battle televised? How do these people know?
Yeah, that occurred to me too.
I mean... Yes, we all saw it in theaters, so we know those moments, but how would people in the regular world know blow for blow how this battle went on?
Yeah, the only theory that I have on that one is that battle took place in the front yard of Avengers headquarters.
Okay.
And Avengers HQ probably had security cameras that weren't blown up when the building itself was blown up. So it's possible that they actually did get to see a big part of this battle.
That building was blown up good.
It was, but the property wasn't.
A lot of the property was. I mean, you look at that battle zone, and it is just basically a crater. There was not much left. So I can see that.
That and Tony's satellites that I'm sure we're looking. And
that to me is probably the best explanation, is that satellite technology in the Marvel Universe is even better. And so a lot of people did get to see, especially people in government agencies.
Right.
But it was still one of those moments that kind of took me out of the show for a second to just go, wait, how do you guys know this?
Now, just before that comment happened, Monica said something that made me have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Monica says, I know an aerospace engineer who'd be up for this challenge. Is this someone in the comics does she have a guy in the chair?
She does not, that I'm aware of. She's been a member of a team for most of her published appearances. And there's no supporting cast member that I can think of that she has that would fit that bill. That raised a flag for me as well, and I was like, who is there someone specific she's talking about? Monica is not one of my favorite characters in the comics. She's not one of those characters that I get every single appearance. So it's possible.
There are characters you don't get every single appearance of?
I don't have that much money. She's an interesting character. I loved her in Next Wave. She becomes a little sanctimonious and a little... When I was in the Avengers, we did not do it this way.
Oh, jeez.
So I really loved that portrayal of her in the comics. But like I said, with Next Wave, and she's been in the Ultimates and the Avengers, and she really doesn't have like much of a regular supporting cast around her, because she's always been part of
the supporting cast.
She's been part of a team and hasn't needed her own supporting cast to fill out the stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, that aerospace engineer, there are lots of aerospace engineers in the Marvel Comics, but I can't think of a specific one tied to Monica. Getting back to the plot, after the discussion of Thanos and Captain Marvel and everything, that Monica gets her epiphany.
Uh-huh.
Yes, her aha moment. And we
Goes
see...
to find her outfit.
Yep. And so it turns out I kind of called it with the drone, but things get translated as they move into the sitcom world, but their basic matter stays the same.
Right.
And that's how they decide to find the 80s drone.
Now, yes, that was when they decided about the drone. I kind of got the impression that they also decided they were going to send an email.
Let's talk about that email.
Sure.
So, it happens back in the sitcom reality. Vision's at work, and they're updating from just regular calculators to computers.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, computers in this show look exactly like they did in 1980s, early 90s media, where you get those screens of just zeros and ones. And as you and I are both people who grew up using computers during that time period, the way they are portrayed on screen is never accurate to how they actually worked.
Yeah.
But then they get that email, which is a little early for most companies, but...
Well, 80s and referring to let's surf the internet threw me off.
But, because it's Vision, I think he, at least subconsciously, has that knowledge. Norm even asks, will it find me a wife? And he says, well, eventually, yes.
Right.
He's making reference to Match.com and eHarmony and all those sorts of things that don't exist yet. So I think subconsciously Vision knows, and so that comes out kind of in his...
banter.
Yeah. Because even though he's in this reality, being the synthesoid that he is, he has to have some knowledge of what he can do, and so he knows what computers are capable of.
Sure. I loaded a window so I could look it up. The technical official birthday of the internet is January 1, 1983, so the fact that they have access to an internet-like thing isn't out of the realm of possibility, I guess.
It's not out of the realm of possibilities, but most companies did not adopt that kind of technology that early, and were not connected to ARPANET, which was the proto-internet that was mostly government and educational institutes.
Right, although it's possible that they are. We don't know what this company does.
True, and their name is Computational Services, so it's reasonable that they would be early adopters of computer technology.
Right.
But then they get the email, and the email has no to, no from. We don't know who sent this email, who it was intended to be going to.
But it kind of went straight into the brains of everybody.
Yes, that was a very creepy moment.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten one of those kinds of moments for a couple of episodes, but having everyone read it out loud in unison was very disconcerting.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if it was intended to be sent into this world or not.
You think it was just kind of the antenna was at the right frequency and it picked it up?
Maybe. If it was done intentionally, I think it was probably someone like Hayward. I don't think it was one of our trio, Jimmy,
Right.
Darcy, and Monica. Because if they had thought about doing that, I think we would have gotten a scene of them discussing it.
Possibly. It wouldn't have been Hayward, though. He goes straight to the guns. And if he had sent it, it would have been much more directed than, hey, this is Darcy's report. I mean, if he was trying to get communication into who he views as hostages, it would have been, keep this on the DL and give us some sign that you read it and something.
Yeah, so I think it's much more likely that it was an accident. I think someone sent a message from the response site to Sword headquarters.
And it was just accidentally intercepted.
Yeah, just because they happened to be using that technology at the same time as it was being sent, and, that sort of thing.
Which, being a government agency, in some respects, using that old computer to send email is not out of the realm of possibility.
Sad but true. Sad but true. Except that it's also Sword, and we saw them having digital x-rays available. And,
right.
You
gotta divvy up your money in certain ways,
Yeah. But then right after that email gets read by everybody, Vision touches the computer.
Which, what was up with that?
I assume that's kind of him absorbing taking anything from the computer off of it and into his memory.
Okay.
And then he uses that same kind of electric touch on Norm.
And we get the scene that was referenced last episode.
Yes! Which means they probably created these props from the full script, not knowing when exactly they would show up on screen. And so be able to reference multiple points in the show. So, not a deleted scene as I had suspected, but a future scene that we had not seen yet. Which is kind of unfortunate that that happened, knowing that there are people who are like me and freeze frame and read every bit of information that they can read. It would not have been difficult for them to digitally paint that out. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a shame that they spoiled
missed the detail.
They missed that detail and ended up spoiling a future moment. Although it was fun theorizing at the time.
Sure.
Now we cut back to the home
mm-hmm.
with Tommy and Billy teaching Sparky new tricks. And we get more of the personal stuff in that Wanda and Vision's relationship is not...
It's not the idealized version that someone specifically creating a universe for that relationship might envision it to be.
Right. And in the 80s and into the early 90s, we did get more references to divorce and that sort of thing. In the Brady Bunch, the family came together because he was a widower and she was a widow. But in the 80s, we could get those mixed families that came from divorce because it became much more common. And so we get kind of that moment of, mommy, daddy, are you going to get a divorce sort of thing. And
right. Or is dad upset because of me?
Right. Yeah.
And
is it my fault?
Yeah. This was kind of the first hint at the reason for the title of the episode.
Yes. Yeah. Although I think it becomes more
about other things later. But when you saw next week on a very special episode of, you knew that there was going to be something like this scene in that episode.
Right. And for those who didn't pay attention, on a very special episode is the title of this episode, which in the 80s, you knew if it was a very special episode that there were going to be serious moments where the conflict was not played for laughs.
Right. This is an episode that you want to watch with your kids so that the conversation afterwards can be with you.
Exactly. And it's going to be about some very serious subject, whether that be alcoholism, drug addiction, the loss of a loved one.
Daddy doesn't love me anymore.
Divorce, adoption. Any of those more serious topics that you need to have that conversation with your kids someday, and here's a way to help you out.
Right.
It was also the episodes that would get submitted to the Emmys for Best Actor consideration.
Oh, these are the ones you want to air on Sweeps Week.
Yes. Yeah. So that conversation that the kids are having with Mom gets interrupted by the drone. And one of my other friends who is following the show and is in a kind of similar situation as you, and turns to me for questions. Mm-hmm. We're talking online, and he said, were there drones in the 80s? And I had to look it up, but yeah, 1986, Israel was using drones in their conflicts, and the drone technology of that time looked very similar to what they show in the show.
Which surprised me a little bit, because there were some elements of it that didn't feel right to me, although I'm sure they are. The fact that it was as small as it was surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it was capable of hovering. I mean, it got in front of Wanda's house and sat there. I'm sure that was not something they took lightly when they wrote this,
Mm-hmm.
but it just felt a little weird to me.
Yeah. And this is the moment where Sparky runs off,
Mm-hmm.
which leads into the rest of the episode, but it's not the important bit of this moment.
Right, that's not the focus right now.
No. This is where Hayward goes full villain.
Yeah.
He lets somebody else take over control of the drone from Monica and says, take the shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so a missile fires out of the drone, and here's where we get Wanda's eyes going red on the black and white monitor.
And again, I don't disagree that that is a villain move, but I also feel like this is generic, freaked out, panicked government agent who is in charge of technology and sees a hostage situation. In his own mind, he's being the hero.
Oh, of course. No one thinks they're doing things for the wrong reasons.
Except maybe Loki.
Yeah, but he thinks the wrong reasons are the right reasons. So, oh man, if I had been Monica, it would have been very tempting to just walk off the project and go to his superior in some way and say he is risking lives, he is going too far. But that's not where the show's gonna go.
Right. Especially since when that scene happened, I thought that it was equipped with, like, guns. But he later tells us it was a missile.
Right.
That's not a small thing. He was going to blow up the kids. He was going to blow up the neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how big the yield of that missile was, he definitely would have taken out the kids with Wanda if it exploded. But yeah, he could have taken out the entire neighborhood depending on the yield of that, and that's not the best way to resolve a hostage situation.
No!
Despite what Speed tells you, don't shoot the hostage. Or maybe shoot the hostage, but don't blow up the hostage.
Yeah, it's it's a different thing.
So then we get our first instance of Wanda leaving the Hex.
And she leaves and is in total Wanda battle outfit.
Yes,
she is in the costume she was in during the Battle of Earth. Her accent is back.
Exactly. Yeah, she is exactly as she was as we saw her in Endgame, but pissed.
Yes. And I gotta
understandably so.
Well, yes, but in that moment, she is acting very Magneto-ish.
True. And this is where how much she controls things and how much something else is controlling things. This seems to be all in her control at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And she basically says, she kind of does the Hulk thing of, leave me alone and you'll be fine. But mess with me and...
you won't.
Yeah. And I love that moment where she mind controls all the soldiers and all the lasers scopes point right at Hayward. It's like, stand down, stand down, stand down. That is a great moment. And I love that she does it just to Hayward. She knows, like Monica says in just a little bit, she knows Monica is an ally.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though Monica is one of the main point persons that she's talking to in this conversation, it's Hayward that she focuses all of her rage on.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, as Monica points out, she is a telepath. She knows what happened.
Yeah, the fact is, in the comics, she does not have telepathic abilities. I think we talked about this a little bit.
In the first episode of this run, you talked briefly about her powers, and telepathy was not... I don't recall telepathy being mentioned.
Okay. So, in the comics, she does not have telepathy, per se. She has magical abilities, and she can rewrite reality, and that ends up altering people's minds, but there's never any moment where she can do the Professor X thing and say, I know what you're thinking.
Which is not what we have seen of her in the MCU.
Well, in the MCU, we've seen her kind of put thoughts into people's heads.
And to take them out, she talks to Ultron about, I saw his fears, talking about Tony Stark.
Okay, alright, fair enough. Yeah, so her powers have definitely changed from the comics to the MCU.
Right. But at that point, at least, in Age of Ultron, there was a proximity thing.
Yes, she had to put her hand next to it and have the energy flow between them in order to get that sort of reading on him. She's not like a Jean Grey or a Professor X, where it is all just completely mental power that requires no outward effect.
Right.
So whether or not she can read which person is behind things, I think she knows Monica because Monica was put in her world. So it makes sense that she knows Monica's motivations and Monica's internal thoughts from Monica being inside that world. Okay. But without her reaching out to Hayward in some way, I don't think she should be able to know what Hayward's thoughts are.
That's fair. I think that at the very least it is safe to say that Wanda was able to read the situation and to know who was in charge.
Reasonable.
So point the guns at that.
And then fire them, damn it.
Things would not go well for her if she did that.
No, but I am not a fan of Hayward at this moment, so...
No, you're not supposed to be.
But there are villains that we do like. Look at someone like Loki. He is a horrible person to everyone around him, but because he thinks it's love funny. Watching him. Hayward, I'm just like, die already. You know, I never have that with Loki. I never think, oh, if you would just go away, things would be so much better.
But he represents the force that our heroes have to work around. And that force is important in this kind of storyline.
Oh, definitely. But there's so much internal conflict as well that I don't think it's as necessary as some other stories.
Perhaps.
Moving on from that scene, Wanda goes back into her world, and we cut to commercial.
Yay! I loved this commercial a lot.
It's the quicker picker-upper.
Yes! It was nice of them to foreshadow this commercial earlier in the episode. While we were in the briefing, they mentioned Lagos.
Yes. For those who don't follow the MCU word for word and letter for letter, Lagos, Nigeria is the inciting incident at the beginning of Civil War that basically forces the world governments to create the Sokovia Accords. And Wanda...
There was a suicide bomber, essentially, and they weren't going to not explode, so she sent him vertically away from the crowd that was on the ground and ended up blowing up a building.
Yes. And so, in trying to prevent some deaths, ended up causing different deaths. It's a question of, was that the right decision or not? Because you don't know how many people would have died had it exploded on the ground versus exploding next to the building like it did. She was doing the best that she could given the situation at hand. But at the same time, it is her biggest regret.
Well, it was the time that she actually caused deaths.
Right.
Or at the very least, it was the time after she decided she was going to be a hero and a good guy that she actually caused deaths.
Yeah, because she worked with Ultron until the point where Ultron said, I'm gonna wipe out humanity, and then that's when she walked away. But you have to think at least some harm was done when she was working with Ultron.
Yes, but at that point, it was all a means to an end. She just wanted to get to Tony.
Right.
And that was how that was going to work. And then it was like, oh, it's bigger than Tony. Crap.
Yeah.
And the tagline of this commercial was awesome.
Oh, it was perfect for when you make a mess that you didn't mean to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what she did in that moment at Lagos, is she was trying to do the right thing, and one could argue she did the right thing, but it still ended up with death and a huge mess that she didn't mean to or want to create.
At the very least, she was, in some very real ways, the scapegoat for that event.
Yes.
Which, I mean, governments need to have a scapegoat, so
you
gotta have someone to point things at, but still.
So, after the commercial, we cut back to Wanda and the kids looking for Sparky.
Mm-hmm.
And we get another moment that I think shows how the residents are starting to wake up a little bit.
With the mailman.
Yes. The mailman says, don't worry, your mom won't let him go far.
Mm-hmm.
Which, obviously, it turns out to be proven wrong, but it feels like in that moment that he's saying, I know your mom's in control of all of this, and so nothing bad will happen to you.
Right.
And as the show progresses, things are fraying at the edges, and whoever made this world the way that it is losing control.
Right. Which could be a number of factors, and one of them is there's this other magical element that was born last episode that might be trying to take a little bit of control too, and when you have that kind of conflict, nobody's going to have complete control.
Yeah, I think we have at least 3 forces inside the sitcom world who have some level of power over the reality of this world, with Wanda, Agatha, and the kids. And as they vie for some level of control, things are going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And now we finally get to what I feel is the crux of the title of the episode, with Sparky's death.
Yeah.
This is the moment where we get the somber music.
Which you had mentioned in a previous one of our episodes, that the establishing background music in previous episodes wasn't as prevalent. This episode had a lot of it.
Oh, definitely. And that was something there was a lot more scoring done in 80s shows, adding the emotion to the scene. You know, in those 70s shows, they used it mostly for little interstitial moments and occasionally to give you a sense of what the upcoming scene was going to feel like.
Right.
As opposed to having it be part of the scene itself.
Yeah, this one was much more integrated, as happened a lot.
Especially in those very special episodes.
Oh, yeah. And Christoph Beck, the composer for the series, did great work for it. And I don't know if you are aware, he has worked with the Lopez team before, because he was the one who did the score for both Frozen movies, as well as all of the side stuff for them.
Yeah,
and he's worked with
sense.
Marvel before, because he did both of the Ant-Man movies.
Okay.
I'm the music guy.
You are the music guy, and thank you for that. But then getting into the scene itself, Wanda refuses to do for the kids what she apparently did for herself.
Yeah, this was way do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. If Wanda is in charge and did all of the things to make this world as it is, she is being very hypocritical by saying we can't reverse death.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's exactly what she did with Vision.
Yeah.
So I wonder if, at this point in the show, is she following the script or is she being hypocritical? Is she the one who says...
You're asking if Wanda is a character in the show at this point that someone else has written the script for, or is she the one that is conscious of what's been going on and she wrote the script and she's just being a hypocrite?
Exactly. When we discover what the truth is, that is going to either make this scene very tragic or just make Wanda incredibly hypocritical.
Right.
This is one of those scenes that could completely change by the time we see the rest of the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of different meanings that it could have depending on what we find out.
True.
I mentioned earlier, there's a moment that I might have a counter example to Agnes being as in control as you seem to think, which is this moment of her saying, "You can do that?" She was genuinely shocked when she heard that Wanda might have the ability to undo death.
That's true. I still think Agnes knows and is part of this, but one of the things that gets discussed throughout this episode, both inside and outside of the world, is how much power does Wanda have?
Mm-hmm.
And if Agatha is a witch, as she is in the comics, then that may be an ability that is outside of her powers, and she assumed that would also be outside of Wanda's
powers. That makes sense.
And so it is just a surprise in that way rather than her not being aware.
Okay. All right, it's still a possibility.
I think it's a definite possibility. There is just too much evidence towards Agnes being a bigger part of this than any of the other Westview residents.
Right.
So now let's go back to the house and Vision and Wanda's conversation.
This conversation broke reality. It broke character. It broke Wanda. It broke Vision. It broke the credits. There were so many things in this scene.
This is where things get really serious because Wanda and Vision look like they are ready to have a big superhero fight.
Yes.
And they're using at least Wanda is using her modern powers. She is got the red energy and is floating there, and it does not look like 80s style wire work. It looks
no. It's MCU special effects.
Yes, it is modern era special effects, and they are ready to go at it.
Mm-hmm. And as their tempers are rising, so are they.
Yes, and Vision has an interesting line during this argument.
Which one?
The one I'm thinking of is, "I can't remember my life before Westview."
Yeah, that's very revealing. Does that mean that he doesn't have access to memories that are in the synthezoid brain? Does that mean that when the Mind Stone was taken from him, his mind was taken from him, and Wanda recreated him from scratch?
Right. How Vision is back, the characters outside the world are theorizing on it. Those of us who are watching the show are theorizing on it. That's going to be a big reveal. And now, I love Paul Bettany, so I hope that this can end with Vision being alive again.
That would be nice.
I would be perfectly happy if it ended with Vision being alive again, but being an unemotional android like in the comics, where we talked about how he got rebooted and reverted to and turned into an all-white version of himself.
Right. I think this, if that were to happen here, it wouldn't be necessarily that he reverted back to nothing, a blank slate. He would probably revert back to when he woke up with Thor's lightning.
Although, if he comes out of this world and doesn't have the Mind Stone in him, then that could be what gives him a
totally blank slate.
Yes.
I mean, he no longer has Jarvis. He no longer has most of that stuff.
Right. So I would be happy to have Vision back in that form and play with the character from there and see where he can grow. Give him more of a Data type storyline where he is very computerized and wants to be human, but now has these limitations placed on him because he's just a computer and
Right.
doesn't have the Mind Stone or Thor's magic or anything external that could awaken him to a fully sentient creature.
Yeah.
And around the same time in the argument is when Vision points out something that we've discussed in
There
the
ain't
show
no
already.
kids.
There are no other children in Westview. Tommy and Billy are the only ones, which raises a question, because one has to assume that in a town of 3,982 or whatever it was,
In the suburbs.
in the suburbs,
In a suburb in which there are playgrounds.
right, in a town that exists, that has 4,000 people in it nearly, one would have to assume that some of those are children.
Yeah.
So,
Where are they?
what happened to those children?
Agent Franklin is watching them.
That's true. We still don't know what happened to Agent
Still
Franklin.
at large.
There is no movement on that story at all, despite us seeing the outside world again this episode. Wow, that's... I kind of wonder if he's going to be forgotten.
I'm sure he is, but not by me.
And that was your Agent Franklin update. We'll just make that a recurring segment of the show.
Yep, still nothing. So yeah, no children.
And so where they went or what happened to them?
Are they in suspended animation in a gymnasium somewhere or something?
Are they being held by Mephisto in hell?
Oh, that's a lovely thought.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's...
It's a big question.
It's a big question with a lot of potential answers and very few of them happy ones.
Right.
And then near the end of the argument, Wanda says, I don't know how any of this started in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe her.
I do too.
And that's another...
indicator that there's another power at large here.
Yes. There is another power that is above Wanda that is even more in control, or at the very least started this rolling.
Yeah, they established the framework and pressed play. But Vision being aware that this is happening was kind of news to me. When he says to her, you can't just go around and what, you want us to watch TV so that you can change everything again?
Right.
And he says to her, you can't control me the way you do them, and she has that creepy moment.
Yeah.
Can't I?
Can't I? And then
And then the credits!
And I love
And
how
the
they have
studio audience
the
laughs.
studio audience cheers that moment. Oh, it is so well done. The combination of the sitcom and the Twilight Zone, basically. And that moment is almost as creepy as all the coworkers reading the email out loud. But it keeps vacillating between whether she has control or not. Yes, she definitely has some control because she seems to be the one who started the credits rolling. But then less than 5 minutes later, she's saying, I don't know how any of this started. And like you said, we both believe her. So finding out who is in charge here, I'm really looking forward to, and seeing where that takes us.
Yes. And speaking of it taking us places, we have reached 32 minutes and 17 seconds when the doorbell rings.
Yes. So, she answers the door, and it is Pietro.
Ish.
However, as Darcy mentions, Pietro has been recast. Who that cast member is
Exploded the internet.
is very important. For those of you who don't watch every superhero movie, this actor is obviously not the actor who played Pietro when he previously appeared in the MCU in Age of Ultron. But this actor is the one who played Pietro, aka Quicksilver, in the Fox X-Men movies.
Yeah, I had the moment of wait, and then I went to IMDb and verified.
Oh, I recognized him as soon as they showed his face. My jaw just dropped.
Oh, yes.
The feeling I got, the just wave of, oh my god, they are going here.
Yeah.
Was so incredible for me.
Yeah, I had the exact same response the second time I watched it.
Yeah.
And the second time was when I watched it with Aiden. And
Okay.
when that moment happened, he did his usual, what? No! No! And I paused and said, it's actually way worse than you think it is.
Yeah, because Aiden probably hasn't seen the X-Men movies with
He has
Quicksilver.
gotten to first class and not passed it yet.
Okay.
So he has not met
Quicksilver of that world. So did you...
I explained it to him.
You explained it to him?
And his jaw hit the floor.
Yeah. You and I talked about the two worlds. Unfortunately, it ended up being cut and is a Patreon only. But
see, you never know what's going to matter.
Yeah, I did not think that the fact that there were two actors playing Quicksilver was going to be important for this show.
Nobody did. How could anyone have predicted that?
But it turns out it is. Well, there is a way we could have predicted this. We know that this show is leading into Doctor Strange 2, which is titled Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Mm-hmm.
The multiverse is kind of what it says. It's multi-universes. Multiple universes that can somehow connect to each other and reach across. And so, because Marvel bought out Fox, Disney/Marvel now has control over all of those X-Men movies, as well as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so, I think that Wanda and or whoever is in control is opening that door to the multiverse. Mm-hmm. And this is our first transfer from one universe to another. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that if Marvel chose any one character to bring over from the Fox X-Men movies, this is the one I would have asked for, because I enjoyed Pietro in Age of Ultron, but I loved Quicksilver in the X-Men movies.
Me too.
For one thing, the effects and how they illustrate his speed is done so much more artfully.
His action sequences in those movies are incredible.
There's only been 2 of them, really. In Days of Future Past, there is a scene in a kitchen in a government facility.
That's the one that really defines him for me.
Well, it was the one that kind of defined him in that universe. It was really where they showed what he could do. And then they had a similar sort of scene in X-Men Apocalypse where he runs through the X-Men mansion as it's exploding and rescues nearly everyone from the explosion. They're done to a pop song of the era, because the Days of Future Past takes place in the late 60s or maybe early 70s, and then Apocalypse takes place in the 80s, and so we get Time in a Bottle and Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, respectively, as Pietro speeds around and does what needs to be done, but at the same time also has a ton of fun while doing it.
Yeah, and there's obviously some questions about the physics of how all of that works, because we get the soundtrack from his Walkman.
Well, yeah. It shouldn't be possible. A cassette tape would break trying to go at that speed in order for him to be hearing it at
relativistic speeds.
You're right, yes.
But it was incredible, so we'll allow it.
Exactly. The rule of cool applies. And so we will totally suspend disbelief to say, yes, that works because it makes the scene as fun as it is.
Yeah.
Now, you pointed out something, I believe, last episode, which is that this entire story takes place before Spider-Man Far From Home.
Mm-hmm.
The chronology of it works out that this takes place before that, even though in release order, obviously, Far From Home came out first.
Sure.
And in Far From Home, Mysterio claims to be from another Earth.
Right.
And so this now makes it much more logical to use that as his fake origin story, because in this world 7 months earlier, there was a real person who came from another Earth now.
Yeah, and it's curious, as has been the focus of our conversations for a few episodes now, finding out who is actually doing these things is going to be fascinating, because earlier in this episode of WandaVision, the kids ask Wanda, "Do you have a brother?" And she gets this faraway look and says, "Yes, I had a brother. I have a brother." She uses present tense.
Yes, she uses present tense. He's very far away.
And that makes me sad. And that sometimes makes me sad.
Yeah.
And if the higher-ups in this alternate universe town thing are trying to keep her happy, it's possible that she isn't the one who ripped the hole in the multiverse.
Very true. Again, she says, when the doorbell rings, I didn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I believe her.
Right.
So this seems to be somebody else bringing in the alternate universe Quicksilver, because bringing Vision back to life, he is in many ways a computer, a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether or not he has a soul, so to speak, is a much more valid question to raise, as opposed to someone like Pietro. And so maybe it's possible that she can't reverse death for living beings. Or, whoever started this can't reverse death for organic beings, shall we say. And so Vision could be brought back, but Pietro couldn't. And so the only way to bring Pietro in and to make her happy is to take a Pietro from another world.
Right, and certainly not a Pietro who died 7 years before this storyline takes place.
Right.
He's been decomposing in the ground for a while. You don't want to bring that back. But
No, Marvel Zombies is not... We're not getting Marvel Zombies yet. That's taking place in the What If cartoon.
Oh, fun. But grabbing Pietro from another storyline that is taking place in the 80s...
Well, time is really weird in the X-Men movies.
Well, and in this town.
They are equally weird. Because X-Men First Class takes place during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
X-Men Days of Future Past takes place during the end of the Vietnam War. X-Men Apocalypse takes place in 1983 because they go to watch Return of the Jedi in the theaters. The characters don't age during these movies, except for the couple of years between filming them.
Right.
So you have someone like James McAvoy playing Professor X, who graduates from college in the 60s and in the 80s looks pretty much the same age.
Right.
And then in 20 years is supposed to turn into Patrick Stewart. So they do some very specific hand-waving with time, moving the characters through the decades without aging them. And
Right.
WandaVision moves the characters through the decades without aging them from episode to episode. So perhaps that was the easiest world to grab from because they are traveling on synchronous paths with time. And so if we have a break in reality where Pietro comes to himself and remembers where he actually is from, that's going to either answer or raise a lot of questions about the multiverse. So I said earlier that Marvel couldn't go bigger after Endgame, and they didn't immediately, but it sure looks like they're building to something bigger now.
Boy, does it. Which, if you're gonna have a movie that involves the word multiverse in the title...
Yeah. The stakes for the movies have gone from being the fate of the world in Avengers to the fate of the universe in Endgame, and now it could be the fate of the multiverse.
Right.
So they found a way to build even bigger, and with this cast and with the story that they're telling right now, I am so looking forward to seeing how it resolves.
It's gonna be great. I'm super excited.
Yeah, and the What If animated series could also tie into this, because in the trailer for the upcoming shows, they show some clips from What If, and there is a moment where Doctor Strange is fighting Doctor Strange.
Huh.
And so it could be that the Prime MCU's Doctor Strange somehow crosses over, and that helps What If also lead into the multiverse. Kevin Feige is very good at planning. And originally, when I saw that What If was going to be an animated series, I was thinking, that'll be fun, but it's not going to pay off at all for the regular Marvel Universe.
Sure.
But now it looks like it could.
Yeah. Any number of possibilities at this point.
And another interesting thing is maybe we're finally getting the X-Men and mutants in the MCU.
Yeah.
Starting with Quicksilver. So is that going to be the way they bring in the rest of the X-Men? One of the big questions has been if/when they bring in the X-Men, is it going to be a case of, well, mutants were always here, but we never talked about them?
Right.
Or are they going to be a new X Factor brought in to the Marvel Universe? And I think this points towards the latter of those two options.
They've got between now and Deadpool 3 to figure it out.
Yeah. And, people have been speculating that in Deadpool 3 he'll just kind of say, yeah, we've always been here. What? He'll break the fourth wall and make a joke. But in the more serious X-Men movies, in the rest of the MCU, they're going to have to make more of an explanation than that. And it looks like the way they're headed is by bringing in the multiverse. And I'll be curious to see if they keep the X-Men separate in their own universe, except for a couple of characters who cross over, or if they fully integrate the X-Men and mutants into the MCU. Do you have a preference on which they...
I don't know. I think both have their advantages. Once the X-Men and the mutants exist, everybody from the audience members to the filmmakers are going to want there to be crossovers.
Of course.
So what I don't want to see happen is hey, we've got Green Arrow and the Flash and the Legends of Tomorrow, and hey, look, there's Supergirl over there. And when it's convenient, we'll bring a character over in one direction or the other, but it always feels contrived. That's what I don't want to see happen. Because there has to be crossovers. Everyone wants them.
Right.
So I think that it would probably make the most sense once you introduce them to just have them exist.
Yeah. Well, in the comics, the X-Men have always kind of been their own little sub-universe. And yes, there are crossovers between the X-Men and the Avengers, and there's storylines where they're get involved in each other's business. But at the same time, they really have their own stories going on, and they don't usually get too involved in the big annual crossover, let's say. In the comics equivalent of Endgame, you might see the X-Men in the big battle montage, but they wouldn't be the ones doing the time heist.
Right.
Even if other non-Avengers characters were involved. But the X-Men stay to themselves, keep to themselves so much.
That's totally in character for them.
It's in character for them, and also the allegory of mutant heroes who are feared and hated by the world doesn't always mesh that well with Avengers who are loved and worshipped by the citizens. And so there's this weird dichotomy of you guys get treated really well while we get treated like dirt just because we happened to be born with powers rather than getting them in an accident later. And so I could totally see someone like Kevin Feige saying these work better by themselves without being in a world with other heroes that are celebrated. And so let's keep it as movies that take place in one universe versus movies that take place in a different universe. And occasionally have a character like Quicksilver cross over, or the Fantastic Four show up in the X-Men universe for a guest star appearance, or something like that, and just have them occasionally meet up with each other, but not have them take place in the same universe.
Right.
From there, Joel and I joked around about some guest star appearances from actors who have been in non-MCU Marvel movies, but that pretty much wraps up any serious discussion of the show. We'll be talking about episode 6 of WandaVision next week, of course, but we'd love to hear from you as well. If you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation, please send in your questions and comments via email to welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown. Population? Us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended